The Mercator Pallidus, also known more informally as the Corpse Guild, is a subdivision of the all-powerful Merchants Guild of Necromunda. The Corpse Guild is responsible for the collection and harvesting of the dead, as well as the manufacturing and trade of corpse starch, a food source that is produced from recycled and processed human bodies. While this particular food source may seem vile or even repulsive to any off-worlders that visit Necromunda, were it not for the existence of corpse starch, much of the world's civilian population would simply starve to death in a matter of weeks, or be driven to commit heinous acts of cannibalism out of desperation. The Corpse Guild is not only responsible for feeding the world's population, but their grim and macabre duties also ensure that any potential outbreaks of disease are prevented, thanks to the Guild properly disposing of the dead. Representatives from the Guild will travel to each settlement throughout Necromunda in great mortuary caravans in order to harvest their dead, and are known to collect thousands of corpses per day, which in turn will be rendered down within great processing facilities owned by the Guild. Because of their strong association with death, the members of the Corpse Guild are seen by much of the world's population as figures of dread and fear, with it even being considered bad luck to look upon the face of a Corpse Guilder. Whenever a mortuary caravan of the Corpse Guild arrives at a settlement in order to harvest their dead, it is common for the Guilders to find corpses neatly laid out for them upon their arrival, whilst the townsfolk lock themselves away within their homes. Other times, smaller harvesting parties will journey to various locations in the aftermath of brutal gang wars or regions recently ravaged by outlaws, in order to seek out fresh meat like hungry vultures, becoming, in a sense, corpse prospectors. Such harvesting parties will typically be comprised of a pair of corpse grinders, a bone scrivener, and a Pale Consort. Of these, it is the Pale Consorts that act as the overseers for such groups. With the aid of their bone scriveners, it falls to the Pale Consort to verify the quality of a potential corpse harvest, and determine their suitability to be processed into corpse starch. If such a bounty meets the approval of the Pale Consort, then the bodies will be harvested by their corpse grinder followers. One of the most infamous of the Guild's Pale Consorts is an outlaw mercenary that would come to be known throughout the Underhive as Queen Lorsha. Lorsha would choose to abandon her duties to the Guild following an outbreak of the disease known as the Neuron Plague, which would transform her entire family into hideous plague zombies. However, by some strange quirk of fate, Lorsha herself would not succumb to the effects of this contagion, though she would appear to have become a carrier of the disease. Despite her family now being undead monstrosities, Lorsha could not bring herself to administer the Emperor's peace to them, and so she would shepherd her family down Hive in search of a safe refuge for them to call home. Eventually, Lorsha and her undead family would arrive at a town deep within the Bad Zones known as Skullhole. After being granted entry into the settlement by the unsuspecting townsfolk, Lorsha would deliver an ultimatum to the citizens of Skullhole: succumb to the plague or feed her family. It would not be long until Lorsha was the sole living being within Skullhole, with the rest of the town's residents either being slain or falling to the effects of the Neuron Plague. Sometime after this, Lorsha would begin hearing a voice calling to her within her mind. While she would initially believe that this voice was coming from her family, Lorsha would soon realize that the source of this voice was someone, or perhaps something else entirely. This voice would go on to convince Lorsha that it was her duty to grant the world's population the blessings offered by the Neuron Plague. Now having found a new purpose in life, Lorsha would set forth on a journey throughout the Underhive in search of potential allies, offering her services and skills to any that would help her spread the disease that claimed her family. But just who, or what exactly, had spoken to Lorsha in order to give her this quest? One possibility is that no one had spoken to Lorsha, and that the voices that the Pale Consort had heard were instead a sign of her slowly succumbing to some form of psychosis, with the voices being the result of auditory hallucinations. This wouldn't be entirely outside the realm of possibility, as many members of Necromundan Corpse Guild have been known to be driven to insanity due to the grim nature of their work. Many of the corpse grinders of the guild in particular have even been documented as falling to the worship of the chaos god Khorne as a result of their madness, becoming little more than raving cannibals who seek to butcher and consume all in their path. Many of these berserkers will then band together to form what are known as corpse grinder cults. Lorsha herself could have been slowly driven insane in a similar manner, due to a combination of prolonged time spent amongst her undead family and lack of genuine human contact. Another possibility is that the being that spoke to Lorsha was none other than the chaos god Nurgle, the god of disease and decay. The idea that Nurgle could have been the one that spoke to Lorsha is supported by the fact that, according to the Book of Ruin, this voice specifically wished for Lorsha to spread the blessings of this disease. To the followers of Nurgle, sickness and contagions are seen as blessings bestowed by the Plague Lord, and as such, many worshippers of Nurgle will seek to spread his gifts to others as an act of veneration to the Chaos God. And the greater the deformities one suffers as a result of Nurgle's gifts, the more esteemed they become in the eyes of both their god and their peers. For example, those who succumb to the disease known as Nurgle's Rot are even gifted the honor of becoming transformed into demons known as Plague Bearers. There is also the fact that the Neuron Plague of Necromunda is highly similar, if not outright identical, to the disease known as the Zombie Plague, one of the Plague God's most potent creations. While the general consensus held by those that dwell upon Necromunda is that the Neuron Plague is the result of an ancient biological weapon dating back to the Dark Age of technology, should the Neuron Plague prove to be the exact same disease as the Zombie Plague, then this further reinforces the possibility of Lorsha having heard the Plague God's call. The Ordo Sepulturis division of the Inquisition in particular has noted that the Zombie Plague is both a physical and spiritual contagion, as it appears to primarily affect those whose faith in the Emperor is lacking. Given how difficult and dangerous life can be for those who dwell within the lower reaches of Necromunda, it's reasonable to assume that many of the world's citizens may feel that the Emperor has turned his back on them. However, such sentiment will often be kept to oneself, especially with how prevalent, zealous, and influential certain religious groups, such as the Cult of Redemption, can be. With all these factors in mind, it's certainly a distinct possibility that Lorsha had been chosen by Nurgle in order to act as his herald upon Necromunda, so as to spread the Plague God's influence, and in turn, increase his power. Lorsha could have even drawn the Plague God's eye by refusing to kill her family after they succumbed to the plague. By refusing to destroy those infected by such a disease, and instead choosing to harbour her family by keeping them safe and well fed, Lorsha could have inadvertently pleased the Plague God enough to grant the Pale Consort a new purpose. After all, many who worship the ruinous powers have often declared Nurgle to be a loving god, and as such, Lorsha's actions could have, for want of a better term, warmed the Plague God's heart. But what if Lorsha was not hearing the voice of a godly entity from the warp calling to her? What if instead, the voices heard by Lorsha came from another human, or more specifically, a potent psyker? There exists a man upon Necromunda whose name is spoken of only in hushed whispers, a man who not only displays powerful psychic abilities, but is feared throughout the Underhive for his vast hordes of plague zombies. Karloff Valois, the so-called Lord of the Dead. As documented within the Apocrypha Necromunda Bad Zones article upon the Warhammer community website, Karloff Valois was originally an off-worlder who would eventually rise through the ranks to become a ruling member of the Necromundan Corpse Guild. However, upon discovering the fact that he was a psyker, Valois was forced by the Arbites to flee into the depths of the Underhive. After several days of scavenging for food, Valois was attacked by a pack of plague zombies. As he was being pursued, Valois would collapse from exhaustion, and the zombies closed in for the kill, beginning to claw and bite at the psyker. Through sheer force of will, Valois would manage to pacify the zombies before falling unconscious. Despite being upon the brink of death for several hours, Valois would eventually awaken from his stupor, surrounded by now placid undead. Even though he had been bitten by the plague zombies, Valois would not fall to the effects of the plague, instead finding that, somehow, his powers had become augmented. The psyker would discover that not only did he retain his telepathic abilities, but he had manifested the ability to leech the very life force from living beings in order to extend his own lifespan. More significantly, Valois discovered that he was able to command those that had contracted the disease. Valois' reputation would grow throughout Necromunda as his hordes of infected swelled larger in size, and soon the psyker would become the single most wanted man upon the entire world, with some even claiming that the man had been blessed by the Dark Gods. Numerous redemptionist cults would begin flocking to the Underhive in the search for Valois, eagerly wishing to test their faith against what they viewed as an archdevil in human form, and eventually the psyker would be found and forced to flee to a vast chasm known as the Abyss. In order to avoid the wrath of the redemptionists, Valois would cast himself into the depths of the Abyss, and despite a several-week-long search by the redemptionists, his body was never found. While he was presumed dead, it would later transpire that Valois still lived. As shown within the novel Back from the Dead, a mass outbreak of the Neuron Plague would occur throughout the Underhive. It would be discovered that this outbreak was orchestrated by Valois himself, so that the Lord of the Dead could retrieve an artifact known as the Black Crown, a psychic amplifier worn by Valois which had been lost after the psyker had cast himself into the Abyss. The Black Crown itself would be recovered by a rat skin tracker, before finding its way into the possession of Proctor Vaughan of the Adeptus Arbites. Valois would succeed in recovering his crown before he and the remainder of his zombie horde would retreat into the depths of the Underhive, wishing to avoid the attentions of both the Arbites and the Redemptionist Brotherhood. Because of this, it's certainly possible that Valois had discovered Lorsha's own affinity with the Neuron Plague, and as such seeks for the Pale Consort to spread the disease. As mentioned earlier, Valois is noted to be a telepath, and as such, he could have easily projected his thoughts into the mind of Lorsha in order to give her his instructions. Valois' reason in giving Lorsha this mission could even be in order for the psyker to gain additional troops for him to command, in preparation for an eventual full-scale assault upon Hive City within the Necromundan capital of Hive Primus. This wouldn't be entirely outside the realm of possibility, as the sole reason as to why Valois had not performed such an action earlier was twofold. Not only had Valois become severely weakened from the mental strain of controlling such a vast undead horde without the amplifying properties of his Black Crown to aid him, but the assault upon the Arbites Precinct Fortress that allowed the psyker to retrieve his prize resulted in thousands of plague zombies being slaughtered by Arbites and Hive Ganger forces. While the spread of the Neuron Plague may prove to be a slow undertaking if allowed to occur at a natural pace, the rate of infection would rapidly increase if both Lorsha and Valois sought to spread the disease throughout the Underhive. Should Lorsha prove successful in this quest given to her by Valois, should the voices in her mind truly be from him, then it may only be a matter of time before hordes of undead lay siege to the world's capital. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.